evening and welcome to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the education and empowerment for all those struggling with substance use disorder. Tonight we're really going to focus in on a few things that are still puzzling to me after many years and it being in the public eye and on the news every single day, especially the opiate epidemic, why the shame and stigma that still surrounds this disease, and how communities have got to change how we view our neighbors and fellow citizens. My special guest tonight is Steve Chassman.
Good evening, Linda. Good
Love
to be on.
Steve Chassman.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are the executive director of LICADD, Long Island Council on Alcohol and Drug Dependency.
Got it.
And we've been having such a great conversation before we even started. So, you know, I'm not going to say that we're far from getting to the corner where we're really going to see some numbers substantially changing. But we're certainly a great distance down the highway in what we've accomplished. So we can't focus on what we haven't done. We can focus on what we have done. But more importantly, 2018, January 24th, what do we need to do this year to really start to, I don't know, wake people up?
Right.
Is that what it is? I don't know what it is anymore, Steve.
Well, there's obviously need for more change. There's a line
Yeah.
that self-help uses in
Yes.
regard to recovery. I may not be the person I could be. I may not be the person I should be, but thank God I'm not the person I used to be. Now, if you take that out of the individual context and say, here we are in 2018 and the numbers for 2017 don't look good, but let's look back over one shoulder as to where we were 10 years ago and how far we've come from 2007 or 2008 to 2018. What kind of legislation, groundbreaking legislation?
Yeah.
I stopped the internet system to track over prescribing, cut down on unscrupulous prescribers, doctor shopping, a real-time database, 911 Good Samaritan law.
That was huge.
A biblical reference
Yes.
when just being a good neighbor to our fellow men and women. Call for help, and even if you're getting high, you won't be arrested.
Correct.
Legislation around insurance companies. We have an attorney general, we have state assembly people and senators, and a governor who's willing to take on big insurance and big pharma and file class action lawsuits to make sure
Yes.
people get what they pay for. And more importantly, the re-education of at least our communities
Yes.
about the disease of substance use disorder. I think we've seen some evidence in the not so distant past, in fact recently,
Yes.
where NIMBYism, not in my
Yes.
backyard, and the stigma of we want to help but we don't want to help here,
Yeah.
is still alive and well. So when you talk about stigma, when you talk about prejudgments or prejudices, it's usually founded in ignorance, which is a lack of education, and usually founded in fear. And that ties into the age-old stigma that these people, those people,
Yes.
drug addicts are this, that, and the other. And in reality, there are neighbors, there are sons, there are daughters, there are colleagues.
There are politicians, there are
Yes.
school teachers, there
That's
are
right.
bus drivers.
Right.
Because even if we take on Long Island, we had a kindergarten teacher on the eastern end of Long Island that died from a heroin overdose. We have bus drivers selling drugs out of there. You know, these are people that are driving your children to school. This is, you know,
Yeah.
people don't rob banks for $400. That's not a bank robbery. That's a cry for help,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, because you know you're going to get caught on some level. All of these things, cars being driven into sides of buildings and homes. These are sick people that are driving on the road while you may be driving your children
Yeah.
to their after-school activities.
And part of the ignorance that feeds the stigma is the symptomology of substance use disorders traditionally doesn't play well with our Anglo-Saxon morals. People tend to not so much lie, but deny.
Yes.
Because of heightened defense mechanisms like denial or intellectualization or rationalization, they tend to make sense of nonsensical behavior that at times put the individual and innocent civilians at risk. Once again, walking through ancient history, the fact that we have partnerships in Suffolk and Nassau County Police, and the
Yes.
men and women in law enforcement are working harder than ever to get the drugs off our streets
Yes.
and really pick the pepper out of fly caca as to who the drug dealers are that are contributing to the detriment of society,
Yes.
and at least be willing to look that these are the sick people. So I'm going to use your metaphor about driving the bus, even though you were given a... buses get driven by true leaders.
Yes.
And it's regrettable that maybe a year ago, and LICADD and myself, we're apolitical. We get support from all aisles, and certainly both
Yes.
sides. But the only way a bus gets driven in the right direction is with a leader and a driver. We were hopeful a year ago that with the first time that we have an openly sitting president who has lost an immediate family
Yes.
member to overdose, that and both candidates ran on it, but this administration had dismissed the National Drug Policy Director, who was the
Yes.
first sitting director under the previous administration with 25 years of recovery experience and an astute professional to lead this country with strategies. So he was dismissed January of last year. That position has not yet been filled.
Yeah.
So how do you combat a national crisis and declare a national emergency, but don't have a national drug policy director to come up with strategies or conduct meetings?
Absolutely.
There is an opiate commission, but it is underfunded. And when you're not funding the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institute of Drug Abuse to really combat this, and once again, it seems like there's a lot more rhetoric coming out around law enforcement. The jails are filled. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other on earth, and it's overwhelmingly untreated substance users. So.
Oh, absolutely. It's untreated substance use. You know, but this year too, Governor Cuomo, he's such a good friend,
Yeah.
you know, and a true leader in giving money where, you know, to be used for the epidemic, certainly, but for all substance use, recovery, right? We have Thrive this year.
Right.
But I was really disheartened to hear that we are going to talk about, you know, making recreational marijuana use okay, because when you're teaching children, it's really hard to say that's not okay when it's okay,
Right.
and we all know it's going to come down to revenue from
Yep.
taxes.
Well, we'd like to see the plan, and he's putting a commission together
Yeah.
to really explore. I mean, you know, much like the tobacco industries or the alcohol industry, you know, they should be filtering X number of a lot of dollars of tax revenue that should go to community education and public service announcements
Yes.
around marijuana use, misuse, abuse, and dependence. Young people and the media ask me all the time, well, what do you think about the legalization? I'm a healthcare professional. Whether it's legal or illegal doesn't really concern me.
Right.
I'm only interested in what's healthy and unhealthy. And the truth is that
Correct.
whether you can't sleep or you have stress or socialization, there are healthier ways to socialize and deal with sleep disorder than marijuana use.
Absolutely,
So
or
we-
any, you know, pill or potion. I'll use your line.
And most of the people we see in LICADD are engaged in some illegal or illicit activity by possession alone, be it opiates or marijuana. So we don't really deal with, although we encourage our clients to stay within the bounds of the law and we work with law enforcement, if it's legal or illegal, there's still going to be a host of people that are going to use it, misuse it, abuse it, and become dependent on it. Now, to your point, and I agree with you, at the height of a national crisis that's killing more Long Islanders and more New Yorkers and Americans at a rate we've never before seen, is now really the time to be putting a commission together to see if this is going to positively or adversely impact public health. Marijuana is a gateway drug. According to this executive director for a 62-year-old agency, not some, not most, but virtually every one of the people that come through our doors looking for help
I'll
started with
tell you
alcohol and marijuana.
from a mom's point of view, and having lost a son, he didn't pick up heroin.
Nope.
He picked up marijuana
Right.
and or alcohol. So, you know, let's go back to basics.
And right, you
Those
can't,
are the gateway drugs, period.
and as they say in recovery, like play the whole tape. You don't start a movie at
Right.
the last half hour. You got to start it at the beginning. And data would show, now of course if there was adequate funding we could be doing concrete studies around this, but marijuana, this is not the marijuana of the 60s, 70s.
Oh my gosh, no.
And they're not
and
even
it's laced with fentanyl.
And wax, dabs, highly concentrated THC. You know, they have
Vaping.
that you plug into your computer to recharge. These are like USB drives. So technology, gaming, substance use seems to have kind of coalesced into this lifestyle thing. So, listen.
And it's a whole alternative world that they're living in.
And I'm sure it's very complicated, but if we can impart to the governor anything, who has been a great supporter of this fight.
He's an awesome supporter. He really is.
Let's look beyond fiscal gains.
Yes.
And if you ask a healthcare professional or a health advocate like yourself, and
absolutely,
is this going to positively or adversely impact public health? And I think if you asked 100 New Yorkers, when it comes to public health, they would say, now listen, do I think we should arrest marijuana users in 2018? No, but that's a separate dialogue.
Correct.
Unless, of course, you're smoking and driving under the influence and putting yourself and others at risk.
Which is, which in and of itself, with recreational use, now we have to train our state troopers, our local law enforcement, how to detect that, right?
And listen, if we were to get high an hour ago, when am I all right to drive? I think it would be different for each of us.
For every person.
Based
Absolutely.
on a genetic makeup, based on if we're smoking the same stuff, based on what stressors are going on, what our attention span is. And mine is probably less than most.
Well, I kind of doubt that. But so talk to me about the app on the phone. Because
Suffolk
that's great.
Suffolk Light, listen, LICADD, since 1956, we're in real time now. We are the 24-hour line, and we've had a 24-hour line for 9 years. We're contracted with Suffolk County, and we just got recontracted. So 24 hours a day, you can reach a LICADD.
Can you tell us a little bit about the data from that? How many, are we?
We had our busiest month in 3 years in partner with the county was December 2017. So
the holidays are not happy times for most people.
And I think also people are asking for help and knowing that it's out there. So although you can reach a LICADD clinician 24 hours a day, it's really real time. I think for better or for worse, most of us are very attached to our devices. So Suffolk Light, which is a LICADD app, Long Island Guide to Health and Treatment. It's a free app. You download it. There are links to Family and Children's and Thrive and FIST and Lyra. And Thomas's Hope is on there. All the COS, Communities of Solution, Oasis licensed facilities, detox inpatient, outpatient, there are links. And of course, there's a link to the Oasis bed locator. So, and there's videos about different pill identification. There's some psycho-ed videos. There's some personal assessment for emotional regulation. It's actually pretty interactive. So
that's awesome.
Again, Suffolk Light, and you can get on Google Apps and enjoy it. If there's things that you think need to be added, it's a living, breathing app. Let us know, and we'll be happy to add it.
That's great. That's great. And how is it going? Because I know that with overdose, especially in Suffolk County, LICADD gets called also.
We do. Yep.
So how many people are we engaging? Is it?
Well, I'll tell you,
it's a tough place to be.
It's a tough program, and there are new programs that are coming about. And we talk about history.
Yes.
This was an inception that came out of the Suffolk County Executive's office. LICADD was proud to be a part of it 5 years ago. But, the person calling for help was not the IP on the gurney.
Yes.
So the person calling the 911 Good Samaritan, if you will, even though we do follow-up calls, so some of the numbers that we were getting were a little skewed because they were either friends or people that didn't want to be identified with an overdose. It was not the IP, the identified person, because they were unconscious on a gurney. And thank God they were revived. So now, even though we're still doing the Narcan follow-ups and the Naloxone follow-ups, there are new programs. I think of Sherpa, I think of Positive Connect, through Central National Guidance, where there are recovery coaches that are being dispatched, and LICADD's 24-hour line is actually helping to dispatch some of these 24 hours a day, to meet people in emergency rooms, to physically engage them, and hopefully making a warm handoff to detoxes, inpatients, and outpatients, in conjunction with expert workers, screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment.
And Thomas's Hope is going to be a part of that. We're going to do the family piece.
See?
So the family, gets treated too, because substance use disorder, I don't have to tell you, is a family disease.
And I think that's where society is moving. There's only now. And we've always said that with the disease of substance use disorder. When you're beaten, you're willing. And that window of opportunity is so small.
So small.
So with another $20, with another phone call, that window can slam shut.
Absolutely.
So if it happens at 10 o'clock at night, by 2 o'clock it could be closed. So the fact that there are opportunities to reach out for help 24 hours a day, that if you end up in an emergency room with an overdose, save, that hospitals, recovery workers like yourself, could be in that ER to actually engage people and walk them through the process of entering treatment 24 hours a day.
And again, I'll say for the family struggles and suffers so much. You know, with when your child is, you know, whether and we always talk about kids because the epidemic is really striking. That 18 to 25-year-old, that 18 to 30-year-old, and even younger than that. And I know John Venza at Outreach has heroin users as young as 12, which is just breaks my heart every time. But when we strengthen the family unit and the manipulation and the lying and all of that can happen in the family unit, the identified person will most certainly either, you know, is going to disengage from the family or say, all right, I give up. I'm going to go, you know, be backed into that proverbial corner, which is, you know, what we want to create.
And this is truly a family disease. I mean, codependency enabling, when you think of the term codependency, the entire family is codependent emotionally and with stability. If the user who's taking mind and mood altering drugs and is constantly on a mind and mood roller coaster, if he or she is stable, the rest of the family okay. If he or she is not stable, rest of the family and all those dynamics and relationships not okay.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned the family disease. Let's not forget about substance use disorders. Yes, it includes opiates. Yes, it includes but alcohol.
Alcohol, too.
We hear about the 60,000 Americans that died last year of opiate overdose. What about the 88,000 Americans that died of alcohol-related fatality?
You know, I think that people, listen, we both know heroin, opiates, you're on a really fast track to destruction.
Right.
Alcoholism takes a very long time.
In some cases.
Yeah.
But that's because LICADD at first we were the Long Island Council on Alcoholism. From 1956 to the end of the 60s, it was alcoholism. And now, of course, we know that if you abuse alcohol and you stop using alcohol and start using marijuana or start using opiates or cocaine, it's like switching seats on the Titanic. The gene that we've identified as the addiction gene, it's not for alcohol, it's for obsessions and compulsions. So people who have this psychiatric disorder called a substance use disorder, as people say, they're often addicted to things they don't even know yet. They have these obsessions, and they'll have to learn coping skills to manage them in all capacities and all outlets. So alcohol, hands down, still America's favorite drug. Ironically enough, the legal one.
The legal one, right.
And we always say this, heroin withdrawal, you wish you were dead, but it won't kill you. Alcohol withdrawal, you need a medically supervised detox.
Yeah, a lot of kids have unfortunately killed themselves withdrawing from heroin because of the...
And I don't think we talk enough to talk about the prescription meds and how the lethal elixir of alcohol plays into that.
Yes.
I mean, they may identify the cause of death as a prescription med, but is there alcohol in the system creating the lethal elixir? We know Xanax and Klonopin and Valium, benzodiazepines and alcohol.
Let's talk about Xanax, because I think that is the new drug that's going to really start rearing a much bigger, uglier head.
And you'll need a medically supervised detox for that too.
And it's so overprescribed. You know, and I always use this analogy. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. When I came home from school and I had a bad day, my mom didn't call the pediatrician and say, Linda needs Xanax, she's not coping well in school. We had cookies, we had milk, we had a conversation. We came up with strategies that, you know, what made you feel uncomfortable today? However my mom went about just being a mom, and that communication, you know, that conversation that we had, that I felt better, in a hug.
And when we talk about the emotional spectrum, there's a resiliency that comes with having to either accept or work through fear or discomfort or anxiety, which is a jambalaya of different fears. Even sadness. You know, if you wait long enough, you realize, and at a young age, if you're mindful of it, that emotions are very much like the weather. They're constantly changing if we allow them to change. Now, if you have neurological imbalances, you know, serotonin, dopamine, that could make for other psychiatric or mood disturbances. That's a little different. But I'll say this as plain as 1 and 1 equals 2. When you ingest mind and mood altering drugs, your mind and your mood get impacted.
Wow.
Most people don't. They come and see us. They're like, I've been so depressed. Well, is it the alcohol you're drinking, which is a depressant 6 days a week? No, it's not the alcohol. It's not the depressant I'm drinking. Oh, I feel like, you know, my anxiety is spiked. Is it the 2 grams of marijuana you're smoking from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night? No, it can't be the mind and mood altering substance that's affecting my mind and mood. So oftentimes people perceive that drugs are the answer to some of their emotional spectrum, when in reality it's probably exacerbating what we call homeostasis or mood balance. And they don't put that one and one together.
But my point, the Xanax, all the benzos, so dangerous to, just like you said, you can't just stop taking them. Valium, or any of those, you can't just stop taking them. You need to detox from them. Why are we overprescribing them is what I'd like to know.
Well, listen, we're a very quick fix society.
Yes.
We consume 80% of the world's narcotics, and we don't make up that much percentage of the world per capita in the way of population. Let me just even go further with Xanax and Klonopin and Ativan and Valium, the benzodiazepines.
Yes.
They are really good at masking fear. They have nothing to do, the treatment for general anxiety disorder or panic disorder is not, they're effective in helping to manage panic disorder.
Okay.
But the treatment for anxiety disorders is really identifying your fears and working through them. Now, if you have a fear of death, acceptance or mindful acceptance-based therapy, come on in, the water's great. We all have some kind of fear of not existing anymore. But, some of these other fears, you have to work with someone to identify what the fears are. And there's a lot that happens from the neck up in between the ears. Assigning some proposed solution to some of them. And if there is no solution, acceptance is a full practice as well.
Just, like the other day, my son, he said, "What's the matter, Mom?" I said, "Nothing's the matter. Just not so happy today." That doesn't mean there's anything the matter. It just means this is who I'm going to be for right now.
That's right.
And that's okay.
And I shared with you before the show started that, hey, we're dealing with some stuff on the side over here, but you know what? Acceptance doesn't mean approval. Doesn't mean I'm happy it's happening, but you know what? I'm trying to assign some solutions. I'm talking to friends about it. I'm soliciting advice or solutions. And when the time comes, we'll apply some of those solutions based on an informed inquiry. But
sometimes you just got to lay on the couch.
And sometimes it rents space. And listen, the greatest thing you can ask a friend is, what do you think? And be genuinely interested in the answer. This is the cornerstone of the fellowship of self-help programs between the sponsor and sponsee relationship. This is the crux of the therapeutic relationship between the therapist and the patient.
It's the crux of just being a human being in the world.
And it's right.
That you can sit with a friend and just say, "Hey, it's not so bad."
Or even if it is, I may not have the solution, but I'm willing to listen to you talk about it. And
I'm here for you.
That's it. That's it. So.
But in today's world, that's what Pam Stark was here last week, and when she went around and taught the program "Too Good for Drugs," was the trainer for that.
Yep.
If parents would open their minds long enough to know that it has nothing to do with drugs, but it has to do with just the very thing we're talking about. Empowering little children to learn coping skills for their whole gamut of emotions.
That's it,
because not everything can be fixed.
And a coping skill, what are we coping with? The emotional spectrum.
Yes.
From sadness and melancholy to happiness and contentment. And there's a lot of thousands of emotional states in between those. It's fascinating if you think about it. And if you were angry this morning on the northern state, most of us have forgotten about that, and we thought it was the end of the world because we weren't going to be there on time.
Everyone should practice yoga. That's what I've decided.
Or mindfulness, just to be able to be mindful that, things are constantly changing. And if we don't attach to one emotion or one experience, if we let it pass, our moods will change accordingly as well. And
absolutely. Sometimes you're never going to have the happiest moment that you think was in your life. You can't match that to another happy moment. Does it make one not happy? Absolutely
and it's perspective.
Not. It's all perspective.
Statistically, someone's having the best day of their life. Statistically, and God forbid, someone's having the worst day of their life.
Absolutely.
Those two individuals, neither one is right or wrong. It's based on their subjective perspective. Yoga, mindfulness, allows us to look at our external and internal landscape and really adjust our perspective. If you wake up each morning and say, today's going to suck, you've sealed your fate for the next 24 hours.
Absolutely. What you think about is what you bring about.
Oh,
so,
well said.
Just get up, just do your best.
Yeah.
Tony Horton, P90X. Do your best and forget the rest.
That's it.
That's all anybody can ever do.
And I love the other line, which is, any wise man or woman need only know one thing: we can't know everything. which means we're going to have to ask others for some.
You know what, though? If you're not learning something every single day, then you're dead, as far as I'm concerned, right? Every single day, do you learn something?
Oh, yes,
It
absolutely.
doesn't have to be mind-blowing.
No,
Could
absolutely.
be, you know.
Sometimes I learn still about what it's like to be fearful and what it's like to be angry or what it's like to be disappointed, as I had a disappointment this week professionally. But, it's not the end of the world. We understand the drug crisis for some is potentially the end.
I know what the end of the world.
Yes.
You know, I already had the worst day of my life. So
But you're
bring it.
But you're converting some
Yes.
of that grief and loss into absolute good that you're sending out among thousands, if not tens of
I'm
thousands.
not afraid to do anything anymore, because what's the worst that I know that if I step off the cliff, I'm going to fly or I'm going to be caught.
Right.
So let's go.
And
Let's
that's
have a
something-
great adventure today.
And to tie it back, you and I were talking, that's what we're hoping for 2018, that
Yeah.
this isn't just, let's not just talk about what we're going to do.
No.
It's an action program now.
You know, that's what frustrates me about all these commissions that come about. Let's get a task force together. We know what the issues are. There's no surprise there.
Right.
Now it's time for money. It's time for an action plan, and let's put everything into effect. Because for every second that we wait, 3 people every 2 days are still dying here on Long Island.
Right.
That's unacceptable. Not one more. And I remember having this conversation with Dr. Jeff Reynolds 3 years ago. Not one more I don't ever want to acknowledge another member of my club.
We were appalled 5 years ago when we said 1 a day at 360. 2
Yeah.
years ago, it was 500. And now we're looking at potentially over 600. So
We're going to be right back after this message.
My age is 18 years old and my name is Evan.
My name is Sean and I'm 19 years old.
My name is Justin, I'm 16.
My name is Angelica. I'm 18 years old.
Marijuana, and I was 13 years old.
Marijuana, and my age was 13.
The first drug I ever tried was marijuana, and I was 12 years old.
It was marijuana and I was 11 years old.
Yes, and that escalated to promethazine, lean.
I began to take pills like Xanax, Percocets.
I began using other substances such as pills and alcohol.
I then went on to cocaine and pills and quickly progressed to heroin. I was 13 years old when I first started using heroin. I had aspirations of going to an Ivy League school, and that quickly, within a year or two, changed. I stopped going to my classes. I stopped going to school altogether eventually. All my friends were kind of just dropping me.
I started getting in trouble in school, eventually kicked out. I got in trouble with the law a lot.
I wasn't really hanging out with a lot of sober people, just people that use. I overdosed at 15. I've been at Outreach for 5 months. Outreach honestly really helps you. It shows that you're honestly worth something. And it's possible to become sober if you put in progress. But it's not just gonna be handed to you, you really have to want to change. Inpatient, you can't just leave. You stay here and you have to deal with it. That's what I feel like a lot of kids need.
In a long-term facility, the counselors get to know the resident better, and they get to actually work with them more than in a short-term 28-day facility. And it really gives kids a chance to work on themselves rather than being rushed through a program, just to be thrown back into life, going back into the same old bad habits that they were doing before.
Coming in here, I couldn't believe how long I would have to be here, but after a couple months, talking to counselors, I kind of came to the realization that I need a lot of time and work to repair everything I've done.
The things that we get taught here, it really does help you in life, and it gives you a different perspective. It's very important for a kid to have a family involvement and treatment so they don't think they're alone in this. We communicate on a better basis than how we used to. We understand each other more. And that was from the help of outreach.
They come every Wednesday night for support group. They come to a group every other week.
They come to parent support group to discuss their problems also. My relationship honestly has gotten a lot better. Because I remember my mom used to never want to say anything to me because she would be scared of my reaction. I'm starting to realize in here, like, I really have to take advantage of the fact that I have her still.
When I was about 14 is when my parents realized that I had several different problems, such as behavioral issues, and the behavioral issues kind of stemmed from my drug use. I began caring less about myself and others. Outreach has really made me realize how important family is. If I was out of state in a program where my parents were not involved, I would have never been able to strengthen my relationship with them. My father told me that I've inspired him to make changes in his life, and that meant a lot to me. I've never heard my dad be inspired by something before, and I was just proud that it was me.
Welcome back to Resolutions for Recovery. So Steve, let's give some community ideas certainly this year. 2018, if you don't have some kind of a program in a school, and it can't be just, we had an assembly for our seniors in June for the prom. That's not, teaching our young people how to cope, how to take care of life. What can individuals sitting at home, they can certainly, from my perspective, band together, go up to a board meeting, a board of
Superintendent,
yeah,
sure.
go to the superintendent, go to a board of ed meeting, and demand that in your community that we have a program, that we get LICADD in. I know that you do school education all over the
We have
island.
about 104 different schools, about 25,000 students a year, but this is something we've been with Kim and a whole bunch of
Yes.
prevention, the PRC, Pam Mizzy, but we've been screaming from the rooftops for the better part of 7 years about evidence-based prevention education materials or curricula that speak to not just the drug piece, but drugs are but a symptom, the healthy
Bullying.
coping skills.
Yes.
It's starting and this has been studied to be effective.
In
But-
kindergarten.
But still to no avail. So, this is potentially a preventable illness, but we have to integrate it into, I can't think of anything more detrimental to a student's academic, physical, psychological, and social well-being, not to mention intellectual well-being,
Do you know-
than the issue of drugs.
I spoke to a parent, and unfortunately, their son was in high school and shooting heroin, and they were concerned. And I remember mom looking at me and going, "But what about his SAT scores?" I go, your son, if he's dead, is not going to score well.
Right.
So who cares about school right now? School will come and school will go. It's his health and well-being today.
And this,
Everything
Linda.
else will fall into place after that.
Families carry their own level of denial,
Yeah.
and you could speak to this better than I can, but when you hold a child in the hand, I'm told that, you have this image of how this child is going to be, and
Oh,
it's for
absolutely.
health, wealth, and wellness. And then when that plan gets so destructively diverted, that sometimes it's tough for parents to readjust their expectations. And it's like, but he's supposed to be in college. Like, clearly individuals may not be ready for homework or living independently when they're carrying an opiate addiction. But, we talked about the family piece. Like, there's a family denial that exists around this too. And, unfortunately, parents sometimes put it on themselves that they may have failed in some capacity.
Has nothing to do with you.
Nothing to do with you.
Right.
And, sometimes it can, right? But
Sometimes it can.
most times of late, it seems not. I mean,
Correct.
Oftentimes we could see, what's the old adage? Shake the family tree and down come the bottle. Sometimes this is a generational thing. So,
Correct.
The unhealthy behaviors get emulated and exhibited, and then they get adopted by the child. And but like I said, no one's a bad person.
No,
it's
you make
just bad
poor
behaviors.
choices.
Yeah, bad
Right.
behaviors. So, parents tend to, carry the burden themselves, and we're trying.
But, in light of, so we can tie this into many things, because in light of all the women that are coming forward for sexual, harassment, for any of those things, you know, we want our little girls and our little boys not to be afraid of many things. So when you teach them great coping skills and communication skills and how to deal with life on life's terms, that's part of prevention.
Yeah. And healthy communication skills. If you build your self-esteem at a young age and have the school foster these best practices, then saying no to an unhealthy situation, be it sexual or drugs or whatnot, becomes easier because you build self-esteem by doing esteemable acts. And this needs to get taught at a very young age. And with the digital and technological revolution and people taking 172 pictures of themselves before they post the one, not only are we making unrealistic expectations of ourselves, but we're making unrealistic comparisons to other people. So self-esteem really begins and ends with self.
You know, and Kim Lowry, who runs Hugs, said, you know, she'll ask a room full of 300 kids, how many of your parents tell you that you're awesome, that you should have the best self-esteem, and all the hands go up? And then she'll say, how many adults show you how to have great self-esteem? No one shows you how to have great self-esteem.
Right. And you could tell me how great I am. Maybe you will. No. But that's not self-esteem. Self-esteem is I need to believe it.
Yes.
And the way I believe it is I do esteemable acts. Helping other people, feeling confident in the man or the young woman that one develops into. Those esteemable acts are founded in community service. They're founded in some kind of spirituality of belonging. You know, human beings, we're not isolative creatures. We live and work amongst each other.
We do, and unfortunately, you know, I know you and I, when we grew up, you were out riding your bike, you had friends. You know, you didn't make phone calls, you didn't text anybody. You got on your bike and you rode to somebody's house and knocked on the door and you want to play. You know, we were involved. We were on a much different level. And I'm not saying technology is bad, because it's not.
Me either. But we gotta teach how to use it properly.
We have to teach how to use it properly, and there's still room to engage as human beings.
Right.
Next to one another.
And this is my experience. We knew there were kids on the block or kids that didn't have the same academic or intellectual or athletic capabilities than others. And I'm proud of this. In the neighborhood I grew up with, there was a place for everybody.
Absolutely.
That even though so-and-so isn't really good at baseball, the right thing to do was to invite him on your team.
Absolutely.
And even though he invited you to his birthday party, the right thing to do was to go and be inclusive, not exclusive. There seem to be a lot of divisions about like social or adolescence. Adults do it too, and the strata that I'm better than.
Yeah.
And we tend to put ourselves talking about self-esteem in a better than or less than category based on how one is dressed, how one carries himself or herself, what their physical appearance is, and we put a lot of emphasis on the exterior.
Yes.
I mean, 50 billion in the fashion industry, and if you wear the right clothes, that's not self-esteem, but at least that's ego.
Yes.
Wanting people to think I'm the right person.
Correct.
But if you don't believe it, it's almost like dressing up the shell.
Especially young women with,
Yes.
you know, with body image,
Yep.
you know, problems.
That's
with,
right.
You know, we need to start concentrating on just building a healthy,
Right.
well-rounded, you know, I don't want to say the word happy, but just well-adjusted person.
Well-adjusted, and that's the key.
That's what we should be graduating from our high school programs. They'll go on and do whatever they need to go on and do.
And when you say the phrase, and we say it often, coping skills, what are we coping with? No matter what comes down the pike, externally or internally, emotionally or socially, that you have a skill set or tools to regulate yourself and not drink, drug, overeat, oversex, obsess, shop, digital technology, you know.
Yes.
We got to find a better balance for people. I mean, that's the trillion-dollar question. I think you and I talked about it last time, and elected officials have asked people like you and me.
Yeah.
It's not what people use, opiates, marijuana, cocaine,
That's
amphetamine.
unimportant.
It's why are more Americans trying to anesthetize themselves at a rate we've never before seen? What is the draw that this generation of adults and adolescents are trying to check out mentally? And we do it worse than any other country. Why this country, this generation, these drugs, and why now? If you could study that, and I don't have the answers to that. I think it's a multidimensional problem and a multidimensional answer.
You know, you have two parents working and there just never seems to be enough.
Or one.
Just, right. There just never seems to be, you're never getting ahead.
Right.
There's so much pressure on you to perform, to get, to have, to do. Kids want things, and it's an expensive place to live. But the United States is an expensive place to live. We are the richest country in the world. The richest country in the world, and they can't figure out how to get out of debt or why we're even in debt.
And this opiate crisis hit us where we're most vulnerable.
Yes.
It hit us in our stress and anxiety and the fears that have happened in a post 9/11 world. It hit us in our national health care debate. Is health care a right or a privilege? Okay, and I'll just throw that out there. And if someone is sick, in this case with a substance use disorder, does that individual and family, because it's a family disease, do they have a right to get well, or at least an attempt to get well without being submerged in hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical fees? That's something the country still needs to contend with. Is health care a human right or a privilege?
I'm trying to help my son because we were turned away. And so many people that were in my shoes, still carrying all that debt, whether they lost their homes or whatever. That was unheard of.
But we have to ask the hypothetical question respectfully, Linda.
Of course.
If your son was afflicted with heart disease or diabetes, would he have been treated differently with your insurance carrier?
Absolutely.
Would he have been treated differently in the hospitals or healthcare facilities that he visited?
Without a doubt.
I mean, fail first. I mean, I remember your display in that New York senator's office where this is what fail first looks like. You wouldn't tell a diabetic in diabetic shock to go home and fail without your insulin, get sick, and then come back when you're in a diabetic coma.
No, that wouldn't happen.
No.
It wouldn't happen. But you know what? Even one step further with diabetes, if the patient weighs 300 pounds and is told you have to lose weight, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and they come back and they haven't done any of the plan that was given to them, are they withheld treatment? No, they are not.
Right.
If they gain back 50 pounds, are they withheld treatment? No, they are not.
And that comes back to that word,
Yes.
stigma or prejudgment, that there's still a misconception because we have not had adequate leadership from the federal level on down around educating the American public about the disease of substance use disorder. That is a formal diagnosis from the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM. And everything that afflicts the mind is in that book. So this has been a diagnosis with a code and everything for the better part of 40 years. But yet still there is this huge, I wouldn't even say a canyon, or it's a chasm, or just a huge divide about what people think addiction is and what it actually is as a neurological, physiological, psychological, social, and spiritual illness that's progressive and left untreated, like most diseases. In this
Fatal.
case, fatal.
Yeah.
So we haven't done the interventions well. We haven't done prevention education well. And for a disease that is potentially preventable, not for everyone, no, but it's potentially preventable, why wouldn't we invest everything, including the kitchen sink, in doing evidence-based prevention models? You and I have been rolling stones up a very vertical incline hill in trying to get county, state, and federal governments to fund this, to implement this.
And unfortunately, you go to a local level. When you go to the state, you have to go to your local level. You go to your local level and you don't get anywhere. And it's just, they send you on that.
It's like following Alice down a hole, and then you
Yep.
have rabbits in waistcoats. Trying to get
Absolutely.
prevention education to save our kids' lives. And then, of course, for those afflicted, access to care, immediate access to care.
Immediate access to care.
You had asked, and one
For
of
a prolonged period of time. You know, we keep doing this 14 days does not cure a heroin addiction.
yeah.
It just doesn't.
Now, listen, I'm going to credit.
It's not going to work.
I'm going to credit our colleague Anthony Rizzuto with this, although I'm sure I don't know the origins of the idea, but he had said a long time ago, hey, listen, if I can walk into a 24-hour Medi Center and get an antibiotic for an upper respiratory infection, why the heck can't I walk into a 24-hour center and get a screening, brief intervention, or referral to a treatment to a detox inpatient, outpatient, or a therapist? Not to mention an induction for a medication-assisted therapy for withdrawal.
Absolutely.
But it may stem from, well, these people who have the officer deserve our care and attention 24 hours a day, and these people do it to themselves, and therefore they don't. Well, first off, medical communities have what's called the Hippocratic Oath. That means treat the symptom, do no harm. That if there are symptoms and someone is sick, if I'm a medical professional and I'm not, we have benevolence in social work. We're supposed to help the individual get on the path to wellness, no matter who they are, what they smell like, what they sniff, shoot, drink, or whether they use bathrooms or not.
Correct.
But we love to say in this country, in a whole host of capacities.
Yeah.
I can think of civil rights and where we say these people okay, this gender okay.
Right.
Right, and there's a lot of light on that now with the divide, the invisible window between men and women, and
Absolutely.
entitlement in society. And we love to say that in pathology. These diseases deserve our help. These diseases and these people do it to themselves, maybe not.
Yeah.
If you're still saying in 2018 that these people did it to themselves, you clearly are lacking education around the neurological, physiological, psychological, social, and spiritual components of the illness of a substance use disorder.
Until it hits your family.
Of course.
Then everything changes.
Right.
So I encourage people all the time, get involved in your local, listen, if you're a Girl Scout leader, Boy Scout, whatever you are, step up and do education for your soccer team, for your, whatever it is that you're coaching, what you're involved in. If your school's not going to do it, then step up and provide for your group. And maybe it'll be contagious moving outward. You start the fire.
And maybe it's a good time to announce, if I'm comfortable doing it, that February 13th on a Wednesday, a bunch of us will be going to Albany with families in support of treatment. And we're going to be talking to our elected officials about a legislative agenda for 2018 in New York State. We'll be traveling to Albany. There are buses leaving a community near you in Nassau and Suffolk. And never forget, and I say this respectfully to our friends in government, county and state, and these men and women work for us. Their salaries get paid by our tax dollars.
Absolutely,
These are our
100%.
neighbors, our kids, our friends, our wives, our husbands, and believe me, I'm still fool enough to believe, Linda, this is supposed to be a government by the people and for the people. Now, we've seen 5 laws change in 8 years.
Yes, we have.
You have been a driving force behind that. A lot of moms have been, and that's really who we need to show up on that bus and tell their story.
And if you can't get on the bus that day, make an appointment with your local legislator, assemblyman, senator. Start within your own district. You don't have to always go to Albany, but go and sit there and show up often, show up repeatedly, and say, I still haven't gotten the answer to why isn't this being done in our community.
That's right.
Because they answer to you. It's not the other way around. You're not disturbing them. They expect that you're going to come in and see them.
When you go from 300 fatalities to over 600, and those are the preliminary numbers, not official, of 2017, when they almost triple right here on Long Island in a matter of 3 years, that would be one indicator, and I'm not saying it's so, one indicator that we have not yet turned the corner. Even though, and maybe we'll start where, we're finished where we were, but we've done some monumental work in the last 6, 7, 8 years. But clearly there's more work to be done. So
much more work to be done.
But we need people to be able to identify, cohesively develop a strategy, and of course push that strategy forward to implementation.
Back to communities, you see something, say something. Again, when I was little, if I was riding my bike where I wasn't supposed to be, by the time I got home, there were 3 neighbors that already called home. Call home. What's the worst thing that happens? They don't talk to you anymore? So what?
Yeah.
So be it. Can you live with yourself if something happened to the child that you didn't say anything about?
That's right.
I can't.
Or the friend.
Or the friend.
I mean, you and I are...
Or the family member, the husband, the wife, whoever it is.
And we need to change the paradigm on that kind of definition. When we were younger, if you told on someone if they were doing drugs, you were snitching.
Yep.
This isn't... You got to switch... This is saving a life.
This is saving a life.
And that's good Samaritanism, if that's a phrase. That's what it means to be my brother or sister's keeper.
Yes.
That's what it means to be a good man among common men.
And you know what? If they're mad at you, one day they're not going to be mad at you anymore.
Well, we're truly in a life-saving or a life-threatening stage of the epidemic.
And Kim Laube, she taught me, addiction is an adolescent disease. So it can be, if we can hold off that first use
Till 2025. We got a
2020,
shot.
yeah.
We got a
You
shot.
know, even 1920, come on, you know. And once you say, you know, and our good friend John Venza was here, and 35 years, psychologist, works for Outreach, adolescent treatment facility, one of the best guys around
Yep.
for treatment, lost his son last year, and he still, you know, he'll say it today. He didn't allow his son to have a beer with him before the age of 21.
No one could have
because-
educated or been more
No.
knowledgeable.
Absolutely. So once you give it the green light at home, there's more of a green light out on the street.
There's no doubt. It's a very complex illness. It is manageable and treatable. We need more hard data that could really drive strategies.
Yeah.
Once again, when you don't even have a national drug policy director out of the White House for over a year, and there's an epidemic going on, there is not much leadership. We say in the field of social work, the way that you foster change is development, execution, and follow-up. You have to develop a plan, you have to execute that plan, but if you don't follow up and make sure that plan is working, if you fail in any one of those three phases, you will not see your objective met. But right now, we didn't even get out of the development stage.
No, we did not.
The federal government has not developed in a year, this administration, an adequate strategy other than possibly putting a wall up with Mexico when some of the derivatives of fentanyl are coming in through China. And I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that there is such a demand in the United States, that's really where the crux lies and where the strategy needs to hit its home.
and we can talk about this administration. All the administrations
Sure.
have not done anything to, you know, even say there's a problem. For a
Well, when
year,
there was
you
a
know,
problem in the 80s, we thought we'd incarcerate our way out of that problem. And that's because
And that didn't work.
that epidemic primarily affected these people, the red, black, and brown people. And at some point, we should apologize to the African American and Latino
Absolutely.
community on how that epidemic, that healthcare epidemic around crack, cocaine, how we dealt with that as a society. We dealt with it one-dimensionally and one-dimensionally only. Incarcerate, incarcerate, incarcerate. We gave out 10-year mandatory sentences under the Rockefeller drug laws
Yes.
like candy. And not only individuals who were probably sick with crack addiction and a substance use disorder, and their families were sent upstate for 10 years. So that's how we dealt. That's how we dealt with that epidemic. Excuse me.
Need a drink?
I'm good.
Okay. I have some water. So I know we're not going to get out of that this way. We're just not.
We've tried.
We've
So,
tried.
to no avail.
We've tried. So, you know, again, community, step up, go see your, you know, whoever you affect change with, whether that's within your church, your synagogue, whatever, your religious organization. Your kids are on a hockey team, a soccer team, it doesn't matter what they're on. Ask for some prevention work to be done there. You know, if you start talking about, especially young athletes, how many young athletes start with an injury and unfortunately get given, you know, an opiate for pain management.
That's right.
And it's off to the races. So educating yourself on what prescriptions are appropriate for your child.
That's right.
And the length that they should be taking it.
And you know, to no avail, we've been trying to get the medical community to do continuing ed around substance use prescribing patterns, and they have pushback at every turn.
They have. They're not going to be told what to study.
Well, they're the doctors, and they're
Right.
the know-all. But
you know,
and it's
up
not
in,
entirely the medical community's fault.
No, it
I mean,
isn't.
Their job is to treat the symptom, and when you have 30 patients lined up in your waiting room, it's very difficult to be doing a thorough screening and brief intervention or assessment of their substance use disorder and weed out doctor shoppers. But continuing ed about the addictive properties of benzodiazepine and opiates is so important that doctors can have. I mean, we have friends that are physicians, and they'll tell you. They went to school for 10 years and had two hours of addiction training. Excuse me.
Yes. See, it's contagious now. You know, up in Syracuse, and I forget his name now, there's a doctor, and I know he's writing the protocol actually with our good friend Dr. Delman here on Long Island.
good.
But in Syracuse, in an emergency room physician took a closet and actually would see people from Narcan or coming in
Right.
with addiction substance use disorder
Yep.
and give them a medicine-assisted treatment
Right.
that would last maybe 3 days, so that they would need to come back.
And he could do an
that's how
assessment.
he continued to engage them. And now it's becoming a true practice within that emergency room.
And that's something
This
we've
is
been
how
pushing for.
Yes,
That
this
we
is
need,
what we need to do.
protocols from a medical standpoint. Legislatively, we need protocols to come down as far as educational practices and prevention practices, and even inductions, medication-assisted therapy. Why is it so difficult for them to instill that in ERs when overdose victims are brought in? It's still so difficult
Yes.
for someone who's coming in withdrawals or coming out of an overdose just to do an induction for Suboxone or for Vivitrol or
And
whatever.
keep them alive till they can get treatment. You know,
And
they
that's something
may-
we've been struggling with for the better part of
Yes.
5 years. LICADD has been part of that, I would say, pseudo response. But the reality is there are still no medical procedures and protocols for overdose victims in the majority of Long Island hospitals or hospitals across New York State.
Well, our good friend Nora Milligan is actually on that committee
That's right.
for JACO, the Joint Commission for
Sure.
Hospitals. So within every hospital, they have a protocol for a stroke, for a heart attack, that has to be followed to the T. There is no protocol in the hospital for an overdose, because if there was,
Right.
they wouldn't be streeting them 20 minutes after they were dead on arrival.
And most people don't understand, but if you're revived by naloxone, you're in instant withdrawal.
Yes.
So you're physically and psychologically sick and freaked out that you almost had a near-death experience.
Yes.
And most people just want to get to wherever they reside to raid the goodie box to stave off the illness.
Yes.
So if doctors aren't offering them relief in the ER in the form
And
of
comfort meds.
medication-assisted therapies and saying, we have a bed for you now, you're here, just take it. Once again, if there is not leadership from the federal government and protocols to be written by the National Institute of Drug Abuse that could be dispersed throughout all 50 states, not to mention provinces, you really leave the states to scramble on their own to figure out what needs to be done. There's no guidance or leadership. The snake minus the head doesn't know which way to travel.
Exactly.
So
but we have little states like West Virginia. For God's sakes, they were using.
they've been decimated.
Decimated.
I mean,
Ohio.
New York, we're not going to quantify the human toll.
No,
But
no.
there are 10 states who have really, I mean, New Hampshire, Vermont, West Virginia, Kentucky, where the whole infrastructure of the state is about to collapse because people are either deceased from overdose, in treatment, in jail, or actively in their disease and living on the street. There's no people in the deli to sell you the milk. I mean, that's how impacted individuals and families have been decimated.
And unfortunately, I don't. We haven't even touched on orphans,
Right.
grandparents.
Yep.
You know, raising children of. You know, people are dying left and
Right.
right. Never mind the fact that a baby born dependent on opiates or, you know,
Yep.
going to suffer long-term physical,
Yep.
mental, deficiencies.
$500 billion in work-related and economic costs. So that's something Americans regrettably always understand.
$5 billion.
500 billion.
500 billion.
Medical costs, job productivity, time lost at work, and of course, how do you quantify a human toll, which is the worst we've ever seen.
Thank you so much,
Thank
my
you,
friend.
and always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Get involved. Get involved. If you need to find out about the bus on February 13th, just hit the Facebook page up, call LICADD, we'll get you the information. Get involved in your local community. It's a call to action for all Long Islanders, for everyone. Have a great weekend.